Hi, my name is David Warner Matheson, and for the past 10 years I've been exploring the overwhelming evidence which shows that virtually all of the world's ancient myths, scriptures, and sacred stories are based on a system of celestial metaphor in which the figures, the characters, the gods and the goddesses and the heroes and the princesses are based on specific constellations in the heavens, that they are metaphors. They're not talking about literal terrestrial history. They're talking about truths that have to do with the infinite realm. And that's why they're using figures from the infinite realm of the heavens. So in the Iliad, the characters in the Iliad actually correspond to specific constellations. And so yesterday, as I was writing an article for my blog about Book 1 of the Iliad and referring to the wrath of Apollo because King Agamemnon spurned the priest of Apollo, Chryses, and showing how the foolishness of Agamemnon, the willfulness and pride and arrogance and insecurity of Agamemnon caused this terrible calamity when the wrath of Apollo was poured out upon the followers of Agamemnon. And this caused the Achaeans to have to call for a priest to find out, how have we offended the gods? Which god have we offended? It looks like we've offended Apollo somehow. What did we do? Did we miss a vow, or did we do something wrong in a sacrifice? And the priest, or the seer Calchas, tells the Achaeans, Apollo is angry because Agamemnon insulted the priest of Apollo, Chryses. Chryses was a priest of Apollo whose daughter had been taken captive by Agamemnon. The daughter of Chryses, she's called Chryseis, has been taken as a prisoner, as a captive by Agamemnon. So Chryses comes to Agamemnon and begs Agamemnon to let his daughter go. And he brings a ransom of gifts to Agamemnon and says, please let my daughter go. And so as I was looking for an illustration to this discussion of this very important conflict at the very beginning of the Iliad, I came across this photograph of a vase, an ancient Greek vase with artwork attributed to a painter who's known as the Athens 1714 painter. These are names that are given by scholars in the 1800s as they were studying the various different painters, the artwork. They would say, oh, this appears to be from the Pan painter, or this appears to be from the, in this case, the Athens 1714 painter, showing Chryses approaching Agamemnon and begging him to give his daughter back. And Agamemnon sends Chryses away with arrogant and brutal words, insulting him, and Chryses is heartbroken and walks alone along the beach and prays to Apollo for help. And then Apollo becomes furious at the treatment that Agamemnon has given to Chryses and to the daughter of Chryses. And so Apollo pours out his wrath on the Achaeans. Well, this scene from this vase that's now in the Louvre, which is attributed, this artwork is attributed to a painter who was operating in around the year 360 BC, is so clearly based on specific constellations. It follows patterns that I recognized after looking at literally hundreds of examples of ancient artwork that are patterned on the constellations of the heavens. These patterns really just jumped out at me. And although I've seen these patterns in operation in so many different places, and I've talked about them in other videos and in my writings and books, I thought this example is so clear, so unmistakable. And I've tried to send off, I've written journals with, in a scholarly tone with ample footnotes, and sent those off to scholarly journals and to various professors. And so far, I have not had any traction among the academic world to acknowledge that this is going on. But it is so unmistakable. So I just noticed this particular piece in the Louvre. I wasn't in the Louvre. I was looking at a picture of it. I would love to go visit the Louvre and take a picture of this particular vase. But I want to show you how this works in this scene, because this scene is so clear and so unmistakable. These ancient myths, including the Iliad, are not about literal, historical, terrestrial events. These are about, using celestial metaphor, these are teaching us truths that have to do with the very present moment. These stories are about us. They're not about someone else who lived thousands of years ago far, far away from us. These are celestial metaphors talking about things that have to do with the invisible realm, the infinite realm, and they use the majestic, infinite realm of the heavens as their canvas to convey these truths to our understanding for our benefit and blessing. So let's take a look at this scene from the ancient Greek artist, thought to have been painted around the year 360 BC, showing this famous scene from the Iliad where Chryses is on his knees begging to Agamemnon for the return of his daughter. Here's a close-up of the artwork by the Athens 1714 painter on the vase showing the scenes of Chryses entreating Agamemnon to return his daughter. In order to analyze the celestial foundations of this scene, let's begin by isolating the central figures of Agamemnon and Chryses. We see that the king is depicted seated on a throne in a reclining posture with one arm extended forward, and Chryses is depicted on his knees with arms forward, begging the king for his daughter's release. Now let's examine the region of the heavens which furnishes the celestial foundations for this scene. This is a screenshot from the free open source planetarium app called Stellarium. Let's invert the colors in order to make it easier to see the outlines of the constellations as I draw them in. Okay, now I'm going to draw in the outline of the constellation Virgo. This is Virgo. Note the distinctive characteristics of this constellation which show up quite often in ancient myth and in ancient artwork. Virgo appears to be reclining, and Virgo has a distinctive outstretched arm, which is indicated by the bright star named Vinda-Meatrix. Now let's return to our image from 360 BC, depicting Agamemnon and Chryses. Can you see that Agamemnon is very clearly drawn with characteristics of the constellation Virgo? If you've seen as many pieces of artwork from as many different cultures as I've seen depicting figures in the distinctive posture of Virgo with a characteristic outstretched arm, it would jump right out at you when you see this artwork of Agamemnon and Chryses. Now, let's turn our attention to Chryses. Is there a constellation that might appear to be kneeling or crouching down in front of Virgo in the actual night sky? As a matter of fact, there's a very bright and important constellation located in front of Virgo and sometimes envisioned as a figure kneeling or crouching down, the constellation Scorpio. Scorpio is actually a very large and magnificent constellation when seen in the heavens. It looks relatively small in this particular star chart due to the way that Stellarium does the perspective, making constellations larger on either edge of the screen in order to simulate the sky wrapping around the way you would see it if you're outside in person looking at the stars. But you can see that Scorpio does indeed appear to be kneeling down beneath the feet of Virgo in a manner very suggestive of the artwork by the ancient Athens 1714 painter on the vase. Now, just in case there's any doubt that this identification of Chryses with Scorpio and Agamemnon with Virgo is correct, the ancient artist has added a figure directly above Chryses. Let's reveal that figure from the ancient vase. Can you tell who this is above Chryses? The artist leaves absolutely no doubt that this is the goddess Athena. She's holding her famous helmet in one hand and her long spear in the other hand. And if you look closely, you can see that she is wearing her distinctive aegis breastplate, which is fringed with serpents. The close-up image of the artwork doesn't show the entire figure of Athena, but if you look at the vase itself, you can see that the figure directly above Chryses is indeed the goddess Athena. Now, what is so remarkable about this particular scene is the fact that the goddess Athena can be confidently identified with the very constellation located directly above the constellation Scorpio in the heavens, just as Athena is located directly above the kneeling figure of Chryses in this depiction. As I explore in greater detail in my 2016 book, Star Myths of the World, Volume 2, the goddess Athena can be seen to be associated with the constellation Ophiuchus in the night sky. Ophiuchus is located immediately above Scorpio. This fact, that Athena can be shown to be associated with Ophiuchus, and that the ancient artist has depicted Athena above Chryses, helps confirm our identification of Chryses in this scene with the constellation Scorpio kneeling before Agamemnon, who's associated with the constellation Virgo. But the ancient artist has provided us with yet further confirmatory evidence in the artwork depicting this scene from Book 1 of the Iliad. Let's bring in the other surrounding figures in the scene on the vase. Let's focus on this figure of a beautiful woman directly adjacent to Chryses. She's depicted with some distinctive characteristics, which I immediately recognize because I have seen them many times before in other ancient artwork connected to the stars. Notice her hand in this position right here, and notice the way she is shown wearing her hair in a tuft or bun at the top of her head here. These are distinctive characteristics which are associated with the constellation immediately adjacent to Scorpio in the heavens, but on the opposite side of Scorpio from Virgo, just as this beautiful woman is depicted on the opposite side of Chryses from the Virgo figure of Agamemnon. That constellation adjacent to Scorpio in the heavens, on this side of Scorpio, is the zodiac constellation of Sagittarius. Here's the outline of the constellation Sagittarius, which often plays the role of a beautiful woman or female goddess in the world's ancient myths. Note this distinctive aspect of the constellation Sagittarius, a line of stars running upwards from the head of the constellation, suggestive of a plume or feather in the hair, or of a hair bun atop the head. Additionally, this feature of the constellation, which is often envisioned as a bow, can also be envisioned as a hand in the very position that is shown in the artwork on this ancient scene from the beginning of the Iliad. In fact, in my 2016 book, Star Myths of the World, Volume 2, I showed artwork on an ancient vase, also now located in the Louvre in Paris, and thought to date to around the year 410 BC, depicting the goddess Aphrodite in the act of seducing the youth Adonis in the famous myth of Aphrodite and Adonis, also known as the story of Venus and Adonis, to use the Latin or Roman name of the goddess of love and beauty, who was known to the ancient Greeks as Aphrodite. I used this image in Star Myths of the World Volume 2 as evidence that the goddess Aphrodite is associated with the constellation Sagittarius in the heavens. Note the close similarity of the hand in the artwork of Aphrodite seducing Adonis to the hand of the woman depicted standing adjacent to Chryses in the scene from Book 1 of the Iliad. We can be quite confident that the woman in this scene is associated with Sagittarius, which gives us yet additional confirmation that the kneeling figure of Chryses is associated with the constellation Scorpio and Agamemnon with the constellation Virgo. And this ancient scene contains even more evidence to help us to be absolutely certain that it's patterned on the stars of the heavens. Here is a figure above and to the left of the Sagittarius figure as we face the artwork of a youth holding a sort of a basin or vessel. He may indeed be associated with the god Hermes, who's often described in the Iliad and the Odyssey as being of the age when the first signs of a beard begin to appear on the face of a young man. Can you guess which constellation this youth or young god might represent? If you said the constellation Aquarius, then I would agree with you. Here's the location of Aquarius in the heavens relative to Sagittarius and the other constellations we've been examining. In fact, in Star Myths of the World, Volume 2, I also present evidence which argues that the god Hermes is frequently associated with the constellation Aquarius. Whether this figure on the ancient vase is intended to represent the god Hermes or not, I would argue that this figure holding a basin or water vessel is almost certainly associated with the constellation Aquarius and is positioned by the artist in the correct place relative to the other figures in the scene to represent that zodiac constellation just above and to the left of Sagittarius, which would be to the east of Sagittarius in the heavens as we face south, looking at the zodiac band from an observation point in the northern hemisphere. So it's in the correct location for Aquarius in the artwork. Over here, on the other side of Agamemnon, and a little above him, we have this seated figure who may also provide us with still further celestial correspondences in this artwork. If this figure is connected to a constellation, he almost certainly corresponds to the constellation Boötes in the heavens, located above Virgo and with an outline which is suggestive of a seated figure. If you look very closely at the artwork on the vase, you will see that the ancient artist has this seated figure holding up one hand with two fingers in the air, evocative of the pipe-shaped feature in the outline of the constellation Boötes in the heavens. So, this ancient artist has depicted Agamemnon and Chryses with distinctive features of the constellations Virgo and Scorpio, and has then surrounded those two figures with several other figures positioned in the correct relation in the artwork to suggest constellations surrounding the constellations of Virgo and Scorpio in the night sky. The sheer number of the correspondences and the confirmatory details the ancient artist has included make this artwork attributed to the Athens 1714 painter one of the clearest and most undeniable examples of celestial correspondence in ancient artwork that I've encountered thus far, and I've looked at literally hundreds of examples in the past several years. In my blog post discussing this scene, I labeled the figures in the ancient artwork in order to show their connections in one diagram to the corresponding constellations. Starting on the left, I've labeled the figure of the youth or young god corresponding to Aquarius with a capital letter A. And the figure of the beautiful woman standing with her hand touching her collarbone area with the letter B. And I've placed the letter C next to the helmet held by the goddess Athena, who's directly above Chryses in the artwork. I've labeled the kneeling figure of Chryses with the letter D, and the reclining figure of King Agamemnon with the letter E. Finally, the seated figure corresponding to the constellation Boötes is labeled with the letter F. The fact that this scene from the opening of the ancient epic of the Iliad can be shown to be based on the stars has tremendous lessons for us. I'm convinced that overwhelming evidence demonstrates that the world's ancient myths are based on a common, worldwide system of celestial metaphor. They use the stars in order to convey to us truths about a realm we cannot see, the infinite realm, the realm of the gods. They do this in order to reveal truths we need in this life. And that is the case here. As the great teacher Peter Kingsley tells us about this episode in the Iliad, prophets in ancient myth do not tell us about the future. They tell us about the past that has been hidden. And in this episode in the Iliad, the Achaeans have to call upon the seer Calchas to tell them why Apollo is angry at them. The god is angry because Agamemnon insulted and spurned Apollo's priest, Chryses. But until the Achaeans figure out how they offended the god, they suffer the wrath of Apollo. This is the same in our individual lives. As great psychologists and healers, such as Dr. Peter Levine and Dr. Gabor Mate, explain, trauma we experience in early childhood and which we forget and cover over can have profound and lasting impact on our lives until we uncover the source of the problem and acknowledge it and begin to address it. And the same is true on a societal level. There are events, sometimes many decades in the past, which still have yet to be uncovered and acknowledged and addressed. And until we do, they will continue to plague us and bring the displeasure of the gods.